And you'll be happy to know that we did hear whoever flushed the toilet. You'll be happy to know that I turned off my own recording system.
All right. Good evening, everybody,
live.
and welcome to the February meeting of the Palomar Amateur Radio Club. We will start, as always, with the pledge. I will put up a virtual flag for us in the background. Maybe. What happened to it? Okay, I guess we keep me. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming this evening. I know the scope went out quite late this afternoon, and it did not contain the link, but everybody just determined that, oh yeah, same link as every month.
We don't have
so here we are. And we have Marty and 6VI for our presentation a little bit later. We will start off with, well, I don't see Glenn. So I guess, Mark, you want to talk to us about repeaters? Anything you like, recap what you've talked about already and anything more?
Recap. The repeaters are behaving themselves fairly well right now. I'm going to make a run up to look at pass-throughs for our new digital internet interface. We're going to be running a 5.0 gigahertz microwave system for getting internet protocol up inside it'll be in the voice repeater room. And I'm piling small amounts of equipment there. But I got to keep that room not only RF, but bug tight also. So far, we have no mice in there, no bugs, no nothing. I want to keep it that way. And then I was just telling Phil a little earlier that, if he wants to start planning trouble up on the mountain, now's the time to start planning it. Hopefully this will be done Wednesday, weather holding. We've scrubbed it twice due to snow and ice, but it looks good for this week. There was a repeater because I want to get a repeater for doing DMR work. And they just put one up on eBay. It's the same repeaters that we were buying for, what do we buy them for? Was it 500 or 900?
Yeah.
Something like that.
500, I think.
Anyway, yeah, they've got it for 1,200 and something on eBay. So I simply stated they have a better sense of humor than we do, and I'll keep looking.
Now, to be fair, wasn't that retail price, and a lot of clubs got it for 500, but maybe there were people that bought it for retail. Who knows?
Not I, said the little red hen. So for the time being, I will keep looking for a repeater. Anybody finds one, let me know. Other than that, John, you got anything you want to say about the repeaters? Everything's up and running. All right, not hearing anything. That's the end of my story.
Okay, yeah, I see John left his chair, so. Okay.
Mark, I do have one question. The 1.3 machine, that is a non-standard pair, right?
Oh, I saw what you said. I haven't looked. It didn't used to be, but they changed the spacing. What, about 8 years ago?
Because I thought 135 would be the standard frequency.
Yeah, I saw your email, but I have not looked.
Okay, all right. Just curious.
Okay. I skipped over, I forgot the visitor recognition. So anybody who hasn't been with us before, first time joining a meeting, either in person or virtually. I think I recognize everybody except for Marty, of course. So, okay. Well, Marty, you want to tell us, give us your intro, and then you can talk to us more later. You're muted.
Let's do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody recently upgraded, or I think everybody's had their licenses for a while, but any recent upgrades? No. Okay.
I know of a recent downgrade.
Downgrade. Is that possible?
Sorry,
I know
Charlie.
I'm a recent upgrade, Joe.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I no longer
And
have
actually,
any
this is my
radios.
first time attending.
Oh, okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
You want to tell us what your upgrade was and whereabouts you are?
Yeah, sorry. I just turn on my camera real quick because I'm on my phone. Yeah, my name is Joe, and I just upgraded a couple weeks ago to general, and I got my technician about a year ago as well. So in January 2020, I got technician, and I upgraded to general, and I'm here in Oceanside. I remember you from I've typically hang out with on the CERT Oceanside CERT repeater, and with that group on their kind of Tuesday night C4FM roundtable and there. So I remember you coming in, and I think the one meeting we had in person in 2020, I think you were there briefly.
Yep. Yeah, I'm on the CERTCOM team, and we round out the circle of Joes in the CERT group.
Yeah, and I'm another one.
Yep.
Yeah, the number one.
There's other Joe. Yep.
Congratulations on your upgrade, Joe. Outstanding.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Welcome. Yeah, good to see you on. Okay. Let's see. Still don't see Glenn. All right. Announcements in the scope that came out today. If you didn't receive it in your email.
Wait a minute. You
whoops.
skipped the downgrade.
Oh, well, sorry, Charlie. What was the downgrade, Charlie? Yourself?
I can now happily report that I no longer operate on the ham bands. Gave up.
That's a sad day, Charlie.
We'll get back to that later.
Yeah.
You have no idea how sad that is.
I think Mark has some ideas, so.
Well, Charlie and I can talk later.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll be able to do anything useful, but we can at least talk.
Okay. Well, Charlie, your wealth of knowledge and experience is still valuable to the rest of us. Okay. The scope came out today. Apologies for being late. There are some announcements in there about upcoming events. There's the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, March 13th and 14th. There's some links in there and some information. And the president's report, I'm asking people to not to discuss here, but to send an email to myself directly at president@palomararc.org or to board@palomararc.org, and just let us know your feelings about when we're finally able to get back to in-person. What are your plans? Are you planning to come back to in-person? Is it just too far? Is it not going to be for a while yet, and you still want to have Like even when some of us are meeting in person, you still want to have some sort of ability to virtually attend. Don't know what that would look like. Just trying to get a feel for what people are wanting and or expecting to happen as the vaccine is now out and people are, looking to get back to some sort of pre-COVID normalcy, if that's even possible. That's all I have. Are there any other questions, comments, or announcements for the group? Come now. Not hearing any. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just was going to make the, I have some RF test equipment that I'm trying to unload. If you don't mind, I'll make a little 20-second announcement.
Sure, the floor is yours.
I've got a 21 gigahertz Tektronix spectrum analyzer and HP 8640B RF signal generator and some other small odds and ends. And I just don't need 2s and 3s of everything. So I'm starting to cut back now in my quote later years, unquote. So if anybody wants to put together a working test bench, give me a shout.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Let's see. I had a.
Yeah, I meant to do that on the scope, and I forgot to ask you to put it in the scope this month.
Oh, okay. I got an email from someone. I'm not finding it right now. Nope, I don't know where it is. Oh, there it is. So James AD6LP, former club member, is selling a Yaesu FT1000 Mark V, for sale. So I don't have any other details about it. He emailed saying, can I put this ad in the newsletter? I'm no longer a member. It's like, well, technically ads in the newsletter are for members. So, but I mentioned it here. If you need contact info for him, 86LP on QRZ, or send me an email, president@palomararca.org, and I'll get the message forwarded to him. FT1000. Okay. Well, hey, Charlie, I'm going to put you on the spot. You want to introduce our, I'll have you introduce our speaker after I introduce the board. How about that? So your board, your 2021 board, we have Mark, who you heard from earlier, your repeater site and tech chair, KF6 WTN. Keith is your scope editor, KM6 CXW. Chris is one of your directors, KD9LF. Ron is the other director, AJ6FQ. Glenn, your membership chair, AI6RR. One of the Jims, your treasurer, Jim W, K2VO. The other Jim, Jim C, is your secretary, W6TQS. Charlie, NN3V, is your vice president. And I am Joe, K6JPE, your president. Thank you. And Charlie, over to you to introduce the speaker.
Thank you. I think many of us know Marty very well. We can certainly here in Poway thank him for assisting us in our successful antenna ordinance, generating probably one of the friendliest antenna ordinances in the United States, and a plethora of knowledge about ham radio, which he's shared many times in the ARRL forums and in just about every ham fest in California that I know of. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Marty. And I do have to apologize to everybody. Life has interfered here today, and I'm going to have to sign off pretty soon. But Marty, over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Charlie, thank you for the invitation, and again, good to see everybody. Now, when we talked about topics, I gave you a big list, and you came up with the NVIS talk, Near Vertical Incident Skywave. This may be a little awkward. I am not an engineer, as I think I've already disclosed, and a bunch of you are. So if you think that's too boring and you want something else, let me know. I've got a batch of them. But if you want me to go ahead and cover the NVIS stuff, we'll do that.
Amen.
Okay.
It's things like NVIS.
Yeah, that's
where-
not an acronym of my call sign, by the way.
No, I know that. It's things like NVIS and other similar antenna systems where being a plain old experimenter or technician outshines an engineer.
Well, I don't know about that, but let's see what we can do here. All right, I am going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
All right, so let's go ahead and get rolling here. As some of you may have seen, as I sent my list to Charlie, I've got a whole batch of different talks, and they kind of fall into these various areas of ham knowledge. And I'm sure there are some others that that I haven't addressed here, but these are kind of the areas that I think are important for almost any ham to have some basic knowledge about, and then some go way beyond that basic knowledge and get very technical into certain areas. This particular one deals with propagation and band and mode selection. You know, the amateur radio service is blessed with a wide variety of frequencies. We have little slices of the spectrum up and down from LF to light. And each one has its own characteristics. And part of making good use of our resources is knowing, or at least having a reasonable estimate of what band is going to do what for you when, and what is the most appropriate selection to be used for a particular job or a particular task or a particular application. So we're going to talk about near vertical incident skywave. And it basically is a means of communicating regionally that does not require on repeaters and so on, and that it's fairly immune to terrain and obstructions. You know, a lot of the activities that hams do come off a lot better if you're on an 8,000 foot mountain than if you're down at the bottom of a valley. In this case, that terrain advantage isn't really essential, and we'll see why shortly. I know you guys have a great investment in repeaters. The repeater systems work very well. And for public service use, which is one of the activities that I'm heavily involved in here for LA City and for LA County, repeaters are really good, but they do have issues. And here's one of them right here. I think this was the station fire coming up on one of our sites in the San Gabriel Mountains. There are all sorts of issues that may make a site unusable, either power disruption, damage from surges, lightning surges, and so on. There may be antenna or building damage. A site may be hard to access for repair. I mean, I just heard earlier this evening about, gee, we'll get up there when the snow isn't too deep. And some sites you can't get to until late spring. You have the possibility of intentional interference and unintentional interference, and setting aside some of the digital modes where you can have a couple of different conversations going on. For the most part, most repeaters deal with one communication channel at a time, and you may need a lot more than that. Repeaters also have coverage issues. You know, and when you try to get this particular graph on top is just a terrain from Olive View Medical Center to the ACS repeater that I was using, or tried to use when I was responding to the Sayer fire up near Olive View Medical Center in the valley. And but fortunately I'd been there the day before, and I knew that that was going to be a bad path, so we had some other workarounds. But you see all these coverage graphs, there are areas, big areas that are cut off, and you may need more or less regional coverage where you don't have areas that are cut off, and you don't have the luxury of linking a bunch of repeaters to get done what you need to get done. So what we want to try and do, certainly for most public service communication, is you want to jump from the area that's impacted to areas that are not impacted or less impacted, from areas that need resources to areas that have resources. For most of us in Southern California, that means being able to reach into some of the other mutual aid areas in California and potentially up to Sacramento and so on. So you really want to kind of spray the area with RF. And you imagine sitting in a room with a solid roof and pointing the fire hose straight up and getting everybody wet. That's kind of what you want to do. Fortunately, the ionosphere is our friend here. It refracts medium frequency and high frequency waves. You have surface and direct waves, but they only go out 40 to 80 miles, and they are terrain dependent. The higher the frequency, the shorter they go. You have sky waves, which can really reach anywhere on Earth under the right conditions. And the question we have to ask is, where on Earth do they reach? And to a great degree, that depends on the angle at which the wave approaches the ionosphere. And then there are some other considerations too, in terms of the condition of the ionosphere. But that angle of incidence it kind of determines at least the first landing spot for that signal once you launch it. For those of you who misspent your college days in the student union instead of studying, this will look familiar. If you hit the cushion at a very shallow angle, the ball is going to end up pretty far away from where it started. If you hit the cushion at a very steep angle, it's going to come back very close to where it started. And now, by the way, I'm going to be talking about, as a lot of times we're going to mention reflection, but in fact, what the ionosphere does is refract, much as when you put a straw in a glass of water and the straw appears to bend. That's just going from one density medium to another density medium. And so what really is happening is refraction here, but sometimes we'll talk about reflection because it's easy to visualize. So just as on the pool table, a shallower angle of refraction will end a signal up, considerable distance away. In the case of the F layer of the ionosphere, which is what we rely on most of the time for this sort of thing, that could be maybe 1,500, 2,000, say 2,000 miles away. And multiple hops can continue around and under the right conditions span the globe. I've been on expeditions where I have actually talked literally to the other side of the world. I was out in Southeast in the Indian Ocean, talking back to California on 80 meters CW, and it works. So we know that happens. But even though you have these long hops, you've got what's called a skip zone in between the areas that aren't covered. They're too close in. Now, if you can get a signal up a little higher at a sharper angle, that skip zone is reduced. And of course, if you get it up high enough, your skip zone is eliminated. That's kind of what we're looking to do if you visualize back to that map of Southern California. Now, there are a couple of ways to look at this. There's something called a critical angle, and that varies with frequency. The critical angle is the angle above which no refraction occurs. It's the highest angle where a signal setup will come back down. That's for a given frequency. For a given angle, there's a critical frequency, and the critical frequency is a high angle signal will come back down. Beyond any higher than that frequency, you will not get the refraction, and the signal just kind of passes on into free space. So if you look at 10 meters, very typically, the low angle signals will propagate when there's sufficient ionization. I mean, we're at the bottom of the sunspot cycle now, so you don't get a lot on 10 meters, maybe some sporadic E, which is a lower layer, and it gives you shorter hops here. But it's common when the F layer is well ionized, like in the high part of the sunspot cycle, to work all around the world on 10 meters with good signals. 15, You can maybe get a little higher angle, and therefore, you can both work the longest hops and some somewhat shorter hops, but the high angle signals still are going to go on up. 20 meters, pretty much the same thing, but you get a little steeper angle. 40 meters, an even steeper angle. 80 meters, okay, there's a chance that it'll come right back down. Not always, and we'll see that shortly. So basically, NVIS is not for the high bands. When Charlie was introducing this, he mentioned, the antennas. NVIS is really, it's a system that involves picking the right bands for the given conditions and then using the right antennas. It's not just a selection of antennas. You can have the greatest NVIS antenna in the world, but if it's on a band that doesn't work right now for NVIS, if the critical frequency is lower than what you have set up for, it's not NVIS. It's not going to work. So understanding what band to use when is probably the most critical skill. And then you have a variety of antennas you can use to make it work. And we'll talk about antennas near the end. 20 meters going straight up might be refracted if you're at the top of the sunspot cycle in the middle of the day, but not right now. It just doesn't happen. So it's seldom optimal for NVIS. So we're really talking about the low bands. Just to illustrate, I kind of kept track of the states I've worked on. 17 meters, okay? And you notice I've got pretty much the country covered, but right near me is a bunch of these states that are close in. They're too close in, okay? To get to Nevada and Utah and so on, I would need a very steep angle signal to get down in here. And 17 meters is kind of like 15 and 10. It's a long hop, okay? So that's why these close-in ones are a problem. One year for a disaster preparedness fair, we set up a little demonstration station on 20 meters with a dipole. And I had 100 watts and 4 hours. And the antenna was about 20 feet in the air. So this is what I was able to work in that 4 hours. Not bad. I mean, it's just sitting there out on a table with a battery and people walking by and answering their questions. This is what I was able to work. But again, notice this big white area did not get Nevada, Utah, Arizona. Again, they're just too close for 20 meters. So that leaves 80 and 40 and 160 and to some extent 60 meters. So which band will give the best results? And that answer depends on where we are in the sunspot cycle, what time of the day it is, what time of the year it is. And as I mentioned earlier, understanding this is really the key to successful regional communication. Those of you who are engineers, I'm sure know that regardless of the initial polarization that a signal may launch with, everything that the ionosphere retracts is basically split into two circularly, or I say elliptically polarized components. Circular is just a special case of elliptical. And you get some that basically are come back in a clockwise and one counterclockwise. So they call the ordinary wave and the extraordinary wave. The extraordinary wave tends to have a slightly higher critical frequency than the ordinary wave. They're maybe within a megahertz of each other. So the higher the frequency, the less reliable that vertical angle refraction becomes. You're getting close to the hairy edge where it's just not going to refract anymore. And remember, the ionosphere is not static either. It's moving all the time. It's a just gossamer thin area, a region of displaced electrons. And as you get close, that reliability goes down. For the ordinary and the extraordinary waves, the highest frequencies, we call them FO, F2, and FX, F2. FO, F2 is what we normally refer to. That's the ordinary wave for the F2 layer of the ionosphere. That's the highest frequency at which a signal sent straight up comes back down. And there are great graphs. I'll show you one in a minute. But the magnetic field also influences these X waves, not the O waves. So their velocities are somewhat different. So that gives you a phase shift. So you get this elliptical polarization. Their refractive indices are slightly different. So they'll necessarily won't follow the same path once you launch that. Usually the O wave is stronger than the X wave. Ionosons are basically localized signals set up and then measured coming back down to determine where the critical frequency is at any given time. And you can see once you get above a certain frequency, they stop coming back down. You also notice, you think, oh, we have multiple reflections. No, what this is a case where the reflections are pretty strong. And what you're seeing, this is the first bounce. Okay, then it comes back down, it bounces off the earth and goes up again. You get another one, another one, another one. So you've got up and down 4 times. That's what these mean. But this is the one you pay attention to. This is the action where the refraction is actually taking place at a high angle up until it doesn't. The Institute of Physical Sciences in Australia takes information from these ionosons around the world and maintains a great system of critical frequency maps. It actually covers the whole world. This is just expanded to show the North America. And they update it every 15 minutes. It's a wonderful tool, and I've used it for years and years to figure out how tough a time I'm going to have on a particular net. So when we are near the top of the sunspot cycle, this is maybe a typical daytime map, and you can see the color code across the top indicates the frequencies. And here we are in Southern California. We got maybe 8, 9 megahertz is the critical frequency. So what does that mean? That means 40 meters is easily within that, and you send it straight up, it's going to come back down. So when I started in this stuff, it was kind of a high spot of the sunspot cycle, and the mantra was 40 meters in the day, 80 at night for local communication. Well, that's fine when you got a lot of sunspots and the map looks like this, but when you get into a low part of the cycle, as we have now, it may look more like this. Okay, so here we are at maybe 5 megahertz at best, and that means signals significantly above 5. You might have a megahertz or so leeway because of those X waves, but this once you get much past 5 or 6 megahertz, the high angle signals may not come back down, and so this may be a little more problematic on 40 meters, at least for close in. At night, it gets even worse. This yellow is 2 megahertz. And I've seen it where the whole North America is 2 megahertz, except for a big blob in the middle, it's 1 megahertz. Okay. So those organizations that say, well, we're going to have our regional net on 80 meters at night. That was the old mantra, 80 at night, right? Well, here we are. 80 meters will not have much of a chance in this case. We're up, those nets typically operate near the top of the band around 4 megahertz. And here we are with a critical frequency around 2 megahertz covering pretty much all the Western United States. That's going to make it really tough to be heard, except by stations that are at a considerable distance away. The California Office of Emergency Services has HF nets twice a week, Monday evenings on 75 meters and Wednesday mornings on 40 meters. And these days, this is not an uncommon kind of situation where we find ourselves. So I may be able to reach the farthest of the stations up north because that's a lower angle to get there. But everybody within a few hundred miles from me, I can't even tell they're on the air. And that's basically, makes 80 a bad choice of bands. We really should probably be on 160. And we've done some experiments, and in fact, it works far better, but not enough people have the antennas for it. So this is kind of what we're up against, and knowing what these conditions are is what will help you make the best choice as to what band is most appropriate. So question, if the lower frequencies are more often below the critical frequency, why don't we just use 160 all the time? Well, the problem is there's another factor at work, and that's called the D-layer. We talked about the F2 layer, which is the one primarily responsible for ionospheric refraction. We talked about the E layer, which is sporadic. They call it sporadic E for a reason. Sometimes it's there, a lot of times it's not, and it can last very short periods of time, get a little closer in. But below those lie the D layer. The D layer basically is an absorber of RF signals, and when it's ionized. Now because it lies below the E and F layer, it's ionized most heavily during the day, but then it dies off pretty quickly at night. And the fact that it absorbs signals during the daytime is why you see certain phenomena. You ever been out in the desert and at night, and you're turn on your AM car radio, if you still have one of those, and you'll hear stations from Salt Lake City and Denver and so on. Well, those are down in the 1 megahertz range. Why are they not getting absorbed? Because the D layer is gone. Okay, it dissipated. So now the F layer can move those frequencies. The same reason most AM broadcast stations have to have a different pattern or a different power level at night than they do during the day. Once the sun comes up, the D layer attenuation returns, and those distant signals you were listening to at night on your AM car radio go completely away. So you've probably all heard this, you've all experienced it, even if you haven't done so on the amateur bands. So during the day, if you, as you go up in frequency, the absorption is less, and therefore the signal strength is greater. But you're also getting closer and closer to the edge of that that critical frequency, and so your reliability goes down. So you have to take a balance between trying to get a strong enough signal but staying low enough to have reliable communication. You want to keep the absorption down, but you don't want to go over the critical frequency either. So this is why band selection becomes really important. So low part of the sunspot cycle, the mantra probably should be days on 80, nights on 160. We've tried this. In fact, on the Cal OES net, we finally, a couple of weeks ago, got some of our members who have equipment on 160 and antennas for 160 to get on. I went over to a fire station where we have one of those installed, an inverted V, and we'd had the net just on 75 meters Monday night to just before that, and it was a huge struggle as usual. We went down to 160, and I had San Diego Navy ECC, I had Los Alamitos, we had Bishop, we had Ridgecrest, we had the Bay Area, had Sacramento. Everybody could hear everybody, absolutely no problem, and most of us were running 100 watts or less. It was, no pun intended, night and day difference from 75 meters. That's how good it was. And so this is why sometimes even 80 meters is going to be maybe a daytime band, but not a nighttime band. All right, so we talked a lot about the propagation. So how do we get a signal to go straight up? Those of you who are DXers, you know that a low angle is desirable to get those long hops and minimize the number of hops to get around to another spot. So it's really good for DXing, but low angle radiation is very poor for NVIS. It's really counterproductive. Not only do you not get the high angles that we're going to come down in the areas you want to cover, but you're also going to be hearing a lot of the noise and other signals that are generated from those distances. One of the typical problems on 75 meters, for example, is if you have a low angle antenna, you're going to hear thunderstorm activity at certain times of the year from the Caribbean, and that can just be roaring, crashing, and make it very difficult to hear anything. So you want to emphasize high angle radiation patterns for both transmitting and receiving. And the two keys for that are antenna orientation and antenna height. Orientation is easy. You don't want to use verticals. Verticals are very popular for low bands, first because you don't have to have as high and as long a support. and they're good for DX. They lay down a nice low angle signal, but they have almost no radiation straight up. They have a null up there, and that's almost the opposite of, just about the opposite of what you want. So that means horizontal antennas are what we're looking for. However, the height of the antenna is going to be critical. An antenna can easily be too high for NVIS. And at half wavelength, the main lobes are low. I'll show a little graph of that in a moment. If you keep it near the ground, say under 3/8 of a wavelength, the main lobes tend to be high. Okay, some of you recognize this from the ARRL handbook. So here we are at a half wave up. Okay, you got a null straight up. That's not particularly good. Every multiple of a wavelength up, you have this null going straight up, and that's where you want most of your signal. Okay, but if you keep it down quarter wave, an eighth wave, look at what you got. Okay, very little out here. Most of the response is up high angles, so that's what you're looking for. Fortunately, that's good because it means you don't need big towers and so on to put up an effective NVIS antenna on the low bands. You can string it from trees. You can, and now as you get closer to the ground, the efficiency goes down, of course, especially with the crummy ground we have around here. But I mean, the 75 meter V that I use to run the Southern California, I'm sorry, the ARRL Southwestern Division net every Sunday morning. The peaks at about 30 feet and the ends that are about 6 feet off the ground, and everybody hears me, no problem, and I hear everybody pretty well. So it doesn't have to be really high, and that's actually good. So keeping it closer to the ground means you're going to hear less interference from undesired areas outside your intended region of coverage. And as I say, you will have some efficiency loss as the antenna gets closer to the ground. You don't really have to worry about staying below 3/8 of a wavelength. At least most of us don't on 75 meters, because that'd be about 90 feet. Okay. Any of you who have trouble getting your 80 meter antenna down to 90 feet, well, my heart bleeds for you. So what can you use? You can use resonant dipoles, my favorite, non-resonant doublets, off-center feds like G5RVs. You could use a dipole over a reflector system like a screen. You could use a horizontal loop with or without a reflective screen. Bent over mobile whips. This is the Navy, by the way, was using NVIS before the Army did, but the Army in Vietnam found that their regional coverage was not very good when they were trying to go from vehicle to vehicle, and a couple of people forgot to release the whips from their bent over state where they're clipped to the rain gutter on the door, and all of a sudden they realized they could talk to each other. And hey, you know, when it's horizontal we can talk, when it's vertical we can't, and the light bulb went on. Notice I mentioned a reflector system, by the way. The W4RNL, LB Sebek, who is a prolific author in QST and 1010 publications and other amateur radio outlets, was a professor of electrical engineering. He did lots and lots of antenna modeling and building and so on, and wrote up some great stuff. One of the tests he did was, well, if we want a high angle, we'll put up a 75 meter dipole, for example, and then we'll put a reflector underneath it. We'll put a 5% longer wire underneath it. Unfortunately, that wire is almost invisible compared with all the lossy ground underneath. So what he found was a single wire reflector, even though it looks like a 2-element Yagi, is not going to cut it. It really doesn't do anything at all for you. You need a reflector system, and I'll show an example of that. So you can, if you need something for NVIS, you can go between the trees. Charlie, you got some palm trees at your place? Maybe this will work. Thin black wire, pretty stealthy. You can use the maypole type of thing, where the supports for the pole are in fact the radiating elements. You give 40 in one direction, 80 in another, and there you go. I've seen some interesting little kits that people put together using PVC and so on to lay out portable antennas using trees, vehicles, portable masts, outbuildings, shrubs, even traffic cones. I was talking to somebody on one of our nets the other day where during the Loma Prieta earthquake, somebody needed to get on low bands, and they basically laid out a bunch of traffic cones in a parking lot, taped the wire to it, and that was their antenna, and they were successful in making their communications. Now, just thinking of strategy for a moment, if you're working with a group where you're going to try and maintain these communications in a situation where a lot of people have to be in the field, typically the portable and field antennas will be less efficient due to the short setup time, maybe space, height, and so on. If you have a central spot, a command post, if you will, or net control, and you can make that antenna more than average efficiency, that will help make up for the inefficiency on the far end. Remember, it's the cumulative signal as a result of both the sending and receiving antennas, just sort of like moon bounce. Okay, guy with one single long Yagi can work W5UN with 248 elements. Well, same thing here. A really effective and efficient NVIS antenna at one central point can make up for some of the deficiencies of those field deployed antennas. You can get gains of up to 6 dB over a simple low dipole if you design it right. One of the possibilities, something like a horizontal loop over a reflector screen. Now here's a simple, so you simply put up different dipoles for different bands, and they don't all have to be parallel, of course, but here you just have a couple of supports. You could use a one wavelength loop, or actually not even necessarily one way, but that's a good way to start, with open wire line and a tuner. You could have multiple loops, one resonant loops, one for each band. Feed them with balun and coax. That ground screen I mentioned, one of the Sebek did some modeling on this, and what he found was he considered to be an efficient ground screen reflector to enhance that vertical signal was basically a one wavelength by one wavelength grid with wires spaced every tenth of a wavelength and all interconnected. Now, if you think about that on 80 or 160, that's going to take up a lot of space. But if somebody's designing an EOC and they got a big parking lot, there's a possibility they could lay some wire down there before they finish paving it over. That would take about 2 miles of wire on 160 meters and about 6 acres of land. On 75 meters, about a mile of wire and an acre and a half, and 40 meters when we ever get to that point with sunspots again. You can do it in under an acre and with maybe 3,000 feet of wire. But that's a really cool design if somebody can pull it off. Portable antennas. I showed the suitcase one. Up here is a system I made using 4-inch PVC drain pipe and some marine grade RG8X it's a basically choke balun. This one I think has 24 turns, which makes it suitable for 80 and 40 meters. And I use strain reliefs on the antennas so that the electrical connection is not getting yanked on all the time. You put in a thimble and a Nika press, and then you leave a tail with you could use brass bolts, or you could use in this case I use Anderson power poles to connect to the end. So I could hook up a 40 or an 80 to this, haul it up by a loop and make it work. You have tripods arrangements. Here's one where they've got thread in ground radials, if you will, and an NMO mount on the top. So you could use a mobile whip, and then you can see they have their stuff deployed for the NVIS low bands there. So you have both VHF and low bands all in one pole. For those of you who want to see how your NVIS coverage is, there are quite a few nets out there that you can try on Saturday mornings, 7 o'clock on 3.965 megahertz. You have the Nevada Aries net, and I find I can check into that almost every Saturday morning, and I can hear most of the participants from up in the Reno area out to, in fact, they have people checking in from Arizona. They have people checking in from the San Joaquin Valley, and then down south here. Sunday mornings, we have the Southern Arizona Races Net. During the winter, it's at 6:30 our time, 7:30 once we change times, because they're on Mountain Standard Time and they don't change. On 3990 at 8 o'clock, I'm normally the host on the ARRL Southwestern Division Net. We have section managers, section emergency coordinators from the Southwestern Division and several adjacent sections out of the Pacific Division. And we get reports back and forth and so on. That lasts about half an hour, and it's been very, very useful for a lot of people. The Bishop Amateur Radio Club Net, I should fix this slide. They just changed their time now. It's 7:30 in the morning, and they have folks from Winnemucca, Nevada, down through Bishop and then down into Southern California. At 8:30, we have the Riverside County and Imperial County Races Nets, a little bit apart on that band. Los Angeles Aries has a net on 3860. So there are all sorts of nets going on. They all welcome visitors, and they all have some sort of news at the beginning. So if you're up Sunday mornings and you want to tune around a little down on 75 meters, you can pick up on these nets, and you don't have to check in. You can just listen and pick up some of what's going on in the area. I mentioned Sebek. Now, this used to be a free site. After he passed away, his heirs decided to monetize it, and now you have to pay a fee for it. But some of those articles are still out there in QST and other places where you can read them. If you, of course, are an ARRL member, you can go to the periodical search function on the ARRL.org website, and you can put in an author, you can put in a subject, and you can get back in many cases, the articles themselves, until they started publishing electronically in about 2012 or 13. Most of those articles are available as PDFs. You can just click on it and download it and keep it and read it and print it, whatever you have to do. So there are good ways to get get those articles. So that's it for the presentation. So let me stop sharing. We'll go back to the screen here and see if people have questions, comments, suggestions. I know I didn't stun you with my brilliance, so you must have something here. Hey, Mike.
Hey, so isn't it pretty much true that most people have an NVIS antenna for 80 on their normal antenna? I do.
Pretty much, yeah. In fact, I'm thinking back to the early days when we were first doing DX contesting from our parents' houses, and we had a tri-bander up and so on, and we had some sort of dipole up for 80 meters hanging from a 50-foot tower or something, and we said, hey, let's get on 160 and we'll work all this DX on 160 and get some multipliers. So we wound coils on golf club tubes and stuck them on the ends of the 80, and all we could hear were one another. So we were doing NVIS and didn't even know it. But if they're using a vertical, though, no, it's not an NVIS antenna. So that would be the exception. But yeah, everybody with an 80-meter dipole, if it's less than about 120 feet up, it's NVIS effectively.
My trees aren't that tall.
Yeah, mine neither, unfortunately. Other questions?
I'll make a comment. So my dad lives in Louisiana. He has about eight acres of land, and he's got a 160-meter full wave loop.
Nice.
Up about it's up about 40 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Strung up around some pine trees, and that antenna is just magnificent. It does great for DX. It does great for local stuff, vertical incidents. It really is an amazing antenna.
And the DX is almost incidental. I mean, that coverage will be because of its height, will be primarily up, but there's always a little bit on the edges. And remember, you can go high angle and have multiple hops up and down and still reach places. I mean, even with my 75-meter dipole and a tuner just to try and keep the transmitter happy, I've managed to work some de-expeditions out in the Pacific on 160. So even with a crummy antenna, you'll get something. So, but of course, we're trying to talk about optimization. His 160 loop there at 40 feet. If they needed regional coverage for at night on something, he'd be the guy to go to, because that would be awesome coverage.
Exactly. He loves to he runs a lot of 80-meter nets at night, so he loves
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I'll make a comment on 80-meter loop. I run an 80-meter loop. And on the high bands, particularly on 10, 15, and 20, the takeoff angle really gets low, and you get some significant gain out of it. So I use it for both. I run 80-meter nets, but I also use it for DX on the high bands.
All right. You're muted, Marty.
Sorry. Once you the main once you get above the design frequency of roughly one wavelength around, you're going to get lobes, and it's going to start looking like some of those other patterns. So you'll get lobes going this way and this way, and it's those low lobes that are going to help you on 20 meters and so on. So you won't necessarily have all departure angles covered as well as you would with, say, a dipole, but yeah, that will definitely work.
Does power have much of an effect, or is it 800 watts usually sufficient?
Power always has some effect. Just observationally on the Cal OES nets, on all my nets, I try to run my amp, so I'm running about 800, 900 watts, and I'm considered the most reliably heard station most of the time on all the California OES stations. And it's certainly not because of the remarkable antenna, as I say, up 30 feet in the middle and 6 feet at the ends. And it's not the feed line, it's RG58 and a lot of it. It's one of those things you put up just to get on, and since it worked, you never really fixed it. I'm sure you've all been there. So, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But having the amp makes it much more reliable. So when conditions are good, I've had guys check into the Southwestern Division net with 5 watts, and we hear them just fine. But it's really a game of percentages. What portion of the time, especially if the band is a little marginal, if you're just the conditions are changing and you're going in or into or out of that critical frequency, moving around, say, below where you're operating, the person with power is going to be heard for a longer period of time than the person without. However, it will not make up for just being too high a frequency for the conditions. Despite the fact that I may be the loudest guy on the band in Sacramento, if we're at a 2 megahertz critical frequency and I'm operating just under 4 megahertz, the guys in San Diego and Ridgecrest and Bishop and so on, often, and out in the Inland Empire, they're not going to hear me at all, and I can't hear them. But I can hear Sacramento and talk to them, and I'm good and strong there. The way this net operates, we often have to have, if net control's in the south, like I do that once a month, I have to have somebody in the north be a relay and call the people around me, because I know I'm not going to hear them. If the Sacramento is net control, I'm going to have to call the people around them in Mutual Aid Region 2 and Mutual Aid Region 3, which are coastal in Northern California, because they can't hear one another. They give the circuit merit 0. They can't even tell they're there, and yet they're nice and loud. So power only gets you so far.
The whole path has to be in critical frequency. That affects both ends have to be in. Well,
the midpoint between you is theoretically where it's going to be most critical. But when you look at the maps, typically it's not sharp cutoffs. I mean, you saw the maps I was showing you. Either almost the whole area you're talking about is 5 or 6 megahertz, and 80 meters is good, or the whole area you're talking about is 1 or 2 megahertz, and 80 meters is bad, except for the lowest angle, longest haul. In fact, some of the folks on the OES net who have the internet available, they use it, and they listen to a software-defined receiver that's online in Utah. And some of you may know about that one. And they'll use Utah to hear what's going on the net because they can't hear any of the other participants. Now, that's expedient, I guess, for net purposes, but if the internet's working and there's an emergency, they won't need us. If they do need us, it's because the internet isn't working and they won't have their SDR. So you better be able to generate a signal and hear something.
Marty, I can see how in the daytime you might need more power just to burn through the D layer, right?
Yeah, but again, it can go so short that it doesn't matter. Again, when it's marginal, the power helps. If you're beyond the pale in terms of the critical frequency, it just doesn't matter.
Well, where's the reflection coming from? Isn't it still up at a higher layer?
It's coming from the F layer. And yes, power will because the D layer attenuates it during the day, it attenuates 40 less than it does 80. That's why they use 40. But we found that actually 80 works reasonably in the low part of the sunspot cycle. But again,
well, I'd say you're trying to do this on 160. I mean, you'd really have to burn through the D layer in the daytime.
The daytime you wouldn't use 160. You just can't. And remember, the farther you talk out, the shallower that angle, the more of the D layer you're going through. You're not cutting straight through it. You're cutting at an angle, so you'll have even more attenuation. So that's why all those distant signals, whether it's your AM car radio or 160 or whatever, they just disappear. They're gone.
Right. Are your slides available online somewhere?
I think I did a similar talk to this for the K7REX group. That's the one that Dan, the section manager for Idaho, put together, and he's got participants all over the country. He's got about 1,000 people signed up, and I did this talk for them, and I sent the slides, and they're available. If you look up RATPAC, RATPAC, they're out there.
Did you say your homepage was n6vi.com?
Yes, but it's
I'm having trouble reaching it right now.
It's out of date. It should be there, but it's out of date. Unfortunately, I had a site builder software that my ISP stopped using, and I haven't been able to amend it for several years. So the list is still there, but presentations aren't on there anyway.
Well, I'm just having trouble reaching the page, period.
I haven't tried lately.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, I guess that's it. Let you guys return to your normal programming, and thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Marty. That was a great presentation. I had to step out a couple of times, family, kids' bedtime and such, but, caught most of it. Really good presentation. Love the Q&A at the end. Great
well, you
stuff.
should have let the kids listen to this. They would have gone right to sleep.
All right. I don't have a program info for next month yet. We will endeavor to get the scope out earlier than it was this month, so you guys have a little bit of a heads up. And yeah, so we'll see you the first Wednesday of March at normal time, and it's always the same Zoom link. So if for some reason you don't see the link in something, it's always the same link, because Mark is generously letting us use his paid account so that we can all do this for more than 40 minutes or whatever. So thank you, Mark, for that. And thank you all for coming. 7-3, have a fantastic evening.
Everybody stay well. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night all.
Thank you, Marty.
All right. Well, if everybody is going to sign off, once I go, the net gets closed. John just came back on.
Oh,
I don't know what the deal is there.
I was trying to leave and then it said update available and then it connected me back up to you.
It's a gift. That was free. All right, kids. Have fun. And yeah, all right. See you, Mike and Gail. And if anybody wants me, I will be up on the I will be up on the mountain this weekend, and hopefully next week we'll get our new toys set up. All right, nothing else. I'm going to end it.